Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Vincent, and this is a story I never thought I'd be telling. I didn't just lose a marriage. I lost a version of myself that believed love could withstand anything. But before I get ahead of myself, let me take you to the beginning. I met Katie years ago at a startup summit, one of those networking events where entrepreneurs and professionals come together to exchange ideas, make connections, and hopefully open doors to new opportunities. I wasn't even planning to go that day. I had a ton of work to do, and honestly, I wasn't typed to enjoy standing around in a crowded hall making small talk. But something told me to show up, and that decision set everything in motion. Katie and I crossed paths during a discussion on business scalability. She was ambitious, full of energy, and carried herself with a confidence that was hard to ignore. She was trying to get her business off the ground, but had gaps in her strategy. Gaps I immediately saw. We struck up a conversation, which turned into a deep dive into business models, funding strategies, and the challenges of building something from the ground up. She asked smart questions, and I had the answers. At that moment, it was nothing more than two professionals exchanging knowledge. By the end of the summit, we had exchanged contacts. She wanted to stay in touch to pick my brain whenever she needed guidance. I didn't think much of it at the time. To me, it was just another professional connection. But looking back, that was the first step toward everything that would come later. At first, our conversations were strictly about business. She would call to ask for advice, how to structure her pricing, how to attract investors, how to handle difficult clients. I always had insights to share, and she always seemed grateful. It felt good to help someone so driven, someone who genuinely wanted to succeed. Over time, those business calls became more frequent. They stretched beyond work-related topics. We started talking about life, ambitions, setbacks. We began meeting for coffee, then lunch, then long evening talks that had nothing to do with business plans or market trends. I got to know Katie beyond her professional persona. She had a playful side, a sense of humor that could catch me off guard. Before I even realized it, those casual meetups became the part of my day I looked forward the most. One afternoon over coffee, she brought up the idea of me joining her company. At first, I hesitated. I was doing fine on my own, consulting here and there. But Katie made a strong case. She wanted someone she could trust, someone who understood the vision as much as she did. She promised me a solid salary, good benefits, and, most importantly, a real stake in building something meaningful. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew mixing business and personal relationships could get complicated, but in the end, I agreed. The first 2 months at her company were intense. I worked hard, proving my worth, not just as Katie's trusted advisor, but as someone who could actually make things happen. I stayed in the background, let her take the spotlight as the face of the company while I focused on refining operations, fixing problems, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It wasn't long before we both realized our connection wasn't just about business anymore. Late nights at the office turned into lingering glances, and before we knew it, we weren't just colleagues. We were a couple. Less than a year after I joined the company, we got married. It felt like the perfect merger in both business and life. We were a power couple. She led from the front, while I made decisions from the shadows. I didn't mind that she was the CEO, the one everyone saw and admired. My role was different, but just as crucial. And for the first 5 years, it worked. The company thrived. Our marriage felt unshakable. We were building something great together, both in the office and at home. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I remember the day we hired Fred. To me, he was just another name on the payroll. At first, I didn't think much of him. He had a way of talking himself out of situations, making excuses sound like valid reasons, and somehow managing to look busy while doing absolutely nothing. At first, I figured he wouldn't last long in a company like ours. Results mattered, and people like Fred usually weeded themselves out when they couldn't keep up. But I was wrong. Instead of being held accountable, Fred thrived. Not because he was good at his job, but because my wife, Katie, made sure he never faced the consequences of his incompetence. At first, I tried to ignore it. Everyone deserves a learning curve, right? But the pattern became impossible to overlook. Fred would miss deadlines, mess up reports, show up late. Yet Katie would cover for him every time. If someone on the team pointed out his mistakes, she'd downplay them, shift the blame, or act like it wasn't a big deal. The same woman who once prided herself on running a tight ship was suddenly letting things slide. But only when it came to Fred. It didn't sit right with me. And it wasn't just about work. I started noticing how often they were together. Their lunch breaks stretched into hours. My wife insisted Fred drive her to private meetings that had no clear purpose. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The whispers started making their way around the office. Little comments from co-workers exchanged in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. I wasn't the kind of guy who jumped to conclusions. I wanted to believe in my wife. But the pieces were starting to add up, and I couldn't ignore the picture they were forming. One night, after we got home, I decided to ask her just a simple question. What's the deal with Fred? The reaction I got told me everything I needed to know. Instead of answering, Katie went straight into defense mode. Her face hardened, her voice sharpened. Oh, so now you're jealous? She shot back, like I had accused her of something outrageous. I hadn't even mentioned the rumors. I was just asking about his work ethic, about why she kept covering for him. But somehow, in less than a minute, she had flipped the conversation, making me the bad guy for even bringing it up. From that moment on, it became impossible to talk to her about Fred. Anytime I mentioned his name, she'd roll her eyes, sigh, or outright ignore me. If I pressed the issue, she'd accuse me of being paranoid, insecure, or trying to control her decisions. It was like a switch had flipped in her. The woman who used to value my opinions, who once asked for my advice on almost everything, suddenly acted like my concerns weren't worth her time. That was the moment I realized that somewhere along the line, my wife had stopped respecting me, and I didn't know how to fix it. Things became harder to ignore as the so-called business trips started happening. At first, they seemed normal. Katie was a CEO, after all, and travel was sometimes necessary. But I knew our industry inside and out. Most of the deals she claimed she needed to handle in person could have easily been done over phone or through email. In fact, that's how we had handled them before. Yet all of a sudden, she was packing her bags every other week, claiming she needed to be on the ground for meetings that didn't require her presence. That alone was strange. But what made it worse? She was always taking Fred with her. There was no logical reason for him to be the one traveling with her instead of me, her husband and one of the company's key players. But every time I brought it up, she had a convenient excuse. Oh, Fred helps me as an assistant. You want to replace him? I was speechless. With every excuse, it became clearer. She was using every opportunity she could to spend time with Fred. The more these trips happened, the more uneasy I felt. I always found the timing suspicious. Sometimes she'd announce a last-minute trip, leaving me no time to ask questions. Other times, she'd leave on a Thursday and stretch the trip into the weekend, business trips that mysteriously included extra downtime. But it wasn't just my suspicions anymore. I started noticing the way our employees whispered. People weren't just talking behind my back. They were pitying me. One night, after yet another one of these ridiculous trips, I decided enough was enough. We had just gotten home from work, and she was acting like nothing was wrong, as she always did. I called her to the living room. She sighed, as if I were inconveniencing her. But she sat down. I didn't beat around the bush. Rumors are going around about you and Fred. She didn't hesitate. She just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "What do you want me to do about mere rumors?" Then she stood up and walked away. Just like that, no explanation, no effort to clear things up. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. My marriage was going downhill. That Monday morning, I had no idea my marriage was about to completely unravel. The board meeting had just wrapped up. A routine discussion about next quarter projections and operational challenges. I was still in work mode when I saw an opportunity to speak privately with Katie about some of the issues raised. We stepped into her office, and as she set her files down, she abruptly said, "Give me a second. I need to use the restroom." Without another word, she walked out, leaving her phone and files on the table. Almost immediately, her phone lit up with a notification. Instinctively, my eyes moved to it. What I saw left me frozen. Fred, damn, you look hot in that gown today. I'd love to give you back shots while you're still wearing it. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My wife was sleeping with this man. The same man she accused me of being jealous of. The same man she had chosen over me at work, in our marriage, and now in bed. I felt instant rage, but something inside me held back. Maybe it was a cold realization that no explanation she could give would undo what I had just seen. I knew if I confronted her without proof, she'd twist the narrative, gaslight me, tell me I was seeing things, that it was a joke, that I was insecure. I wasn't about to give her that chance. With shaky hands, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the message. Then I slid my phone back into my pocket, turned, and walked out her office. I didn't wait for her to return. I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I had to look her in the eye at that moment. That afternoon, already on edge, I buried myself in work. Then a message came in. A client had raised concerns about delays. As the operations lead, I knew exactly where the bottleneck was. Fred. He had missed deadlines, failed to communicate, and made costly errors. So I did my job. I pointed out professionally and directly. But before Fred could even defend himself, Katie cut in. She didn't just offend him. She attacked me. The room went silent. My colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared challenge the CEO, especially when she was defending her favorite. Fred leaned back in his chair, smug. He didn't even need to fight his own battles anymore. Katie was doing it for him. My wife was choosing another man over me, publicly, without hesitation. I could have argued, but what was the point? I took a slow breath, nodded, and said, "Noted." Then I stood up and headed straight to my office. I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop and typed out my resignation letter. I am resigning from my position, effective immediately. I am ending our marriage to I know about your infidelity. I printed the letter, signed it, and walked directly to Katie's office. She was sitting at her desk. I placed the letter in front of her. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from boredom to confusion. She looked up, about to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out. That night, Katie came home to find me sitting in the living room. She sighed like she had just finished an exhausting day, then sat across from me. "Vincent," she started, her voice calm but careful. "We need to talk." I stayed silent. She took that as her cue to begin damage control. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this thing about me and Fred is ridiculous. It's just office gossip, and you're throwing everything away over rumors." Her tone was firm, like she was trying to convince both me and herself. Then she softened, like she was offering me a way out. "You don't have to resign. We can fix this. Just stop listening to nonsense." I let her talk, let her spin her story. And then, when she was done, I pulled out my phone, opened my gallery, and turned the screen toward her. The screenshot of Fred's message was right there. I asked her if she received the back shots. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. It was over, and she knew it. After a long, tense silence, she exhaled defeated. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Just like that, the conversation flipped. She wasn't trying to convince me to stay anymore. She was trying to cut her losses. I told her exactly what I wanted. A clean break. No court battles. No drawn-out negotiations. I wanted my share of the company. Half. To be exact. I had spent years helping build that business, and I wasn't walking away empty-handed. She hesitated, considering her options, but she knew she didn't have many. A public scandal would ruin her, and she cared too much about her reputation to let that happen. So she agreed. I walked away with half the company and a few extra benefits to ensure I wouldn't be starting from scratch. And the first thing I did with my newfound power, I fired Fred. A simple termination notice ended his time in the company. But I didn't stop there. In our industry, connections matter, and I had plenty. I made a few calls, sent a few emails, and within days, Fred was blacklisted. Nobody wanted to hire him. His little ride on Katie's favoritism train had come to a dead stop. Katie and I never spoke much after that. We finalized the paperwork, signed the agreements, and that was it. She still ran her half of the business, and I operated from afar. But one thing was clear. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. Even with all this, I couldn't shake one question. Was it a mistake to work for my wife? I thought we were building something together, a partnership in business and marriage. But power changes people. The moment she held authority over me, our dynamic shifted. I became an employee first, a husband second, and eventually just an afterthought. Did I go too easy on her? Maybe I should have taken everything. Maybe I should have made her feel the same humiliation and betrayal I did. But that's just my perspective. What do you think? Did I handle it the right way? Or should I have fought harder? Let me know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Until next time,